that a German he's working for, a hunter, has a whole armory. And there was a group of 5 men, the initiator amongst them, and Harry Blumenfrucht. And they all together, the 5, were supposed to take these arms from the apartment of the German. There were 2 women in the house. One of them succeeded in running away and calling for help. They escaped without taking any arms with him. During their escape,
would you kindly abridge it because it's too long?
I am trying to make the story short. Harry Blumenfrucht was caught on the street. He had in his pocket the pistol stolen on the previous occasion. He tried to shoot a German who attacked him, but this German was known all over the district. We call him Dog with Dog because he used to walk the streets with a dog. The dog attacked Harry, caught his hand, and he did not shoot in the meantime. Germans came to the help of the German and arrested Harry. They tortured Harry in a terrible manner. The news reached us from people who worked in the prison. There were Jews employed in this prison. And Germans told us the story. The same German from whom the first pistol was stolen was called to identify his pistol and say if he knew Harry. He came back, pistol, and say if he knew Harry. He came back and said, this is a hero. This is not an ordinary human being. They put chips of wood under his fingernails and put fire to them. They put him on an iron net and held him there for 48 hours without a stop. And when he screamed, all he said was, I will not speak, I am dead. In any case, they brought his mother, and she prayed and begged with him, Harry, to shorten your torture, you will not come out alive, but just to shorten your torture, admit something. Harry said nothing. He told his mother, I am doomed, I will not speak. The Germans kept him, I believe, 2 weeks. And they admired the boy. They could not understand, because usually people were hanged in public and Jews were demanded to come and watch Harry. They hanged before dawn during curfew hours because they were afraid. They saw there was something unusual in the man.
Dr. Servatius.
What would happen when a man did not succeed in obtaining a demanded certificate, a certificate of life, as it was called?
When a man couldn't secure for himself or his family the certificate of life and survival, there were 2 ways left to him. Either to be caught, but the people of the ghetto didn't want to be caught, therefore they organized the so-called malinot in Polish, meaning hiding places. This was a hiding place, malina in the local lingo. There was really the whole town of underground activities. Every house, as a matter of fact, was a hiding place, either in the attics or in the cellars. Either holes in the walls were made, or even in the toilets, hiding places were introduced. Every house, in the course of months and even in the course of years, the ghetto was above, whereas underneath there was an underground activity pulsating all the time.
And he who was found without a valuable certificate, what
Anybody
happened?
who was caught by the German authorities and who had no certificate, he was certainly doomed.
Do you remember a case where a man came back home and told his mother, I was supposed to fix a certificate for you or for my wife?
I remember this was a problem in the whole of ghetto, that people were given one kind of certificate so that they could register the wife and 2 children. But if a man had a wife, 2 children, and a mother, he had to choose whom to register because there were only 4 family members who were given a certificate. And on the basis...
Dr. Dvorzetsky, how did a man receive such a certificate, a valid certificate?
People registered at the police headquarters in order to get a certificate.
Would every Jew be granted such a certificate?
Not every Jew could get a certificate of this kind, a certificate of survival. He had to have another certificate proving that he was an expert in a profession which was important. That means, for instance, teachers, newspapermen, intellectuals were not important, but shoemakers, tailors, farriers who could work for the war effort. There was also a number of physicians to treat the sick in the ghetto, but intellectuals, rabbis, shoheds, judges, writers, newspapermen, they were superfluous. They were regarded as people unfit for work, and they were not entitled to the certificate of survival.
And a man would come home and say, Mother...
The man would come back home and he would say, look here, Mother, I have got a certificate, but I can either put on the certificate yourself or my wife. One of you would have to hide somewhere in a bunker. Perhaps you will be lucky to survive, or perhaps not. And if I have 3 children, I can only put the name of the 2 of them on the certificate, and the 3rd has got either to be hidden or will have to be captured by the Germans. I remember one man who came to his mother and said, Mother dear, advise me what to do. You know the situation. Now I can take either you or my wife. And the mother said, it is written in our Holy Bible,
a man shall leave his father and mother and stick to his wife. Your wife was born for you and meant for you from heaven. I shall give my life for your wife. Give that valid certificate to your wife.
She gave the last blessing to the son, to the wife, and to the children.
This was you, Dr. Dvorzetsky.
Yes.
What it said on the
Germans.
Can you identify one of those yellow certificates?
Yes. This was the yellow certificate which ensured to the Jew of the ghetto life for a number of months or even years. This was the yellow certificate, the personal identity card, Ausweis as it was called in German.
Do you submit this to court?
I will submit it to court.
This is T276, and is this the pink certificate?
This was the yellow certificate which was given to family men. The Familienmitgliedausweis, that would mean to say, as I said, this was the certificate of the family man.
This is a children's certificate, the blue certificate.
And the other one was the certificate of the boys. I also remember that on selection day,
this is T2 T277. The pink certificate is T277. The one for the family. What is this?
This is the blue slip which was given to the children, and I remember on the day of selection I went together with my wife.
President of Court, I want to mark this exhibit, please. This is T278. This is the blue certificate for children.
I've been authorized to register 2 children. That time I had no children, so I could register my father and mother, but they knew very well the position. And I took my sister and I registered her as my daughter. Of course, it was very difficult because the age difference between my mother and my wife and my sister was only of 8 years. Therefore, my wife was supposed to look older, and I made effort so that my sister looks very young. There was a little boy who asked, "Who wants to be my father?" And I said, "I will be your father." So I took myself, my wife, my sister, who was passed off as my daughter, and a little boy whom I did know from Adam, and whose life I saved by entering his name on my certificate, because I had a right to save 2 children.
Including the smuggling of food. Without the smuggling, a month or 2. Tell me, what are the most frequent diseases and epidemics? But in short, please.
That was the final stage of a man gradually dying of starvation, the so-called Musulman. We don't know what the origin of this word is.
This was a name given by the Jews.
We heard it from the Germans first. Apparently this name was given to people because on the verge of death they were cold. They would wrap blankets around themselves, and they resembled Muslims wrapped in their big shawls at prayer. Muslims, it meant really, this word Musulman. Maybe there is another origin for this word. The Musulman was a man hovering between life and death. He would walk very slowly. His every motion was very slow. He did everything with painful slowness. When he heard a question, he would reply only after 5 minutes because his thought processes were numb. This was a man who could not control his bowel movements, and he would just die out like a flame which is being extinguished. And they said about these men, they are going out like a candle. All of a sudden they would drop and die.
And women, were there any disturbances?
About 70 or 80% of women in Vilna, and I saw that in other ghettos, had no menstruation. Yes, there were other diseases, skin diseases. It became a plague, this skin disease.
Other skin diseases?
Yes, people had sores, open sores. They had tuberculosis, which attacked the people of the ghetto. There were diseases were swollen limbs, first on the face and other parts of the body. It's edema, this disease is called. Face, hands, feet would swell up and be bloated.
It is something internal, usually. This is liquid matter in
Ordinarily,
the body.
this accompanies kidney or heart disease. But here this was the outcome of stages, late advanced stages of starvation disease, when veins and arteries of the blood circulation system would no longer function, and they would protrude from under the skin.
There were difficult bowel diseases.
Yes, there was a disease which we thought was dysentery first. It killed in the ghettos and in the concentration camps scores of thousands of people.
There were irregular functioning of the urine system.
Yes, these diseases were also caused by hunger. People urinated every 30 minutes or an hour. At night when they were asleep, 30 to 40 people in a room, it would become a living hell because all night...
Diseases of the prostata.
And people would have to go out every few minutes outside of the room, and people were suffering from this horrible disease.
And also this night blindness disease?
Yes, I was in charge of a center, a children's center in the ghetto, and I saw this disease. It spread among all the children. At night they would cease seeing. That was night blindness. Yes, it was because of a lack of vitamins.
And above all, typhoid.
And there was typhoid fever. We organized a very strenuous campaign to combat this typhoid fever, to prevent it from spreading. We set up a disinfection center, and we turned to the Jews, disinfection center. And we would go from courtyard to courtyard and lecture to the Jews from apartment to apartment. We would turn to the Jews and say, please, friends, go to this disinfection center voluntarily because a lice disease is spreading. To the point where people were covered with lice as if it were a shield covering them. It was awful. And people would become apathetic and unconscious almost. And when we introduced this voluntary disinfection, this lice disease did go down, did ebb, but we found it again in the concentration camps.
In the ghetto, did you...
That our camp was
Experiments, Struthof. That our camp was about 83 kilometers from Stuttgart. And from there we were led to Dachau. We saw, it was 1945 then, we felt that the war, we knew the war was drawing to its end, and we decided we would run away along the way. We agreed on a password, L'chaim. When we call L'chaim, to life, then we shall run away. And then we were walking along, and we saw that orders were being given that people should get off the street, get into the forests, and we saw a big lake in front of us. It was near Baden-Baden. We understood that here we are being led to be drowned in the Baden-Baden lake. We walked in single file, and we decided, we shouted L'chaim, and all the Jews scattered in all directions. And in the evening we found ourselves in the forest. 83 people we were. Others may have been elsewhere, scattered in the other forests. Others were lying dead, hit by German bullets. We went on. We lived in the forests. We had no arms. It was a German forest. It was near Baden-Baden, a forest in Germany. The date was the end of March, 1945, perhaps the middle of March. We had lost track of dates and hours and days, and we were there during the nights. We would attack the foresters. They were even afraid of us, of the Muslims, of the prisoners. They would turn over bread to us. They had no choice. Then we would go elsewhere to avoid being abducted. And then one night we heard shots, and we knew we were in between the two fronts. We didn't know who was fighting whom. In the morning, the fighting died down. It was the end of that battle. One boy climbed up a tree and saw tanks, 3 colored tanks. They had the tricolor. We understood this was the French army. We went off down from the trees. We shouted, Humanité, Fraternité, Égalité. And we were put into the tanks. and we rode in those tanks into the German town of Saulgau. And there, we, the 83 Jews, entered with the French army into that town, and I remember a tragic comical occurrence perhaps. Immediately we went to the French headquarters to volunteer to the French army. And I volunteered to the French army, and I was weighed, and my weight was 39 kilograms, about 80 pounds. And I was sent to hospital instead of to the army. And there I did not obey orders in hospital. I ran away, and I went to Paris for my first meeting with other Jewish survivors.
This is your first pamphlet. I believe this is your handwriting.
It is my handwriting.
This is the first leaflet published in Vilna. That is what it says.
Yes, that was the first leaflet calling people to revolt, not only in Vilna, the first proclamation. May I read it out?
Go ahead. President of Court, go ahead.
I shall try to read it straight out in Hebrew. It's written in Yiddish. I remember I wrote it in Hebrew in the original, then I translated it into Yiddish, and then it was distributed, printed and distributed. Let us not be led like sheep to the slaughterhouse. Jewish youth, do not believe to those who are trying to deceive you. Out of 80,000 Jews of Lithuanians' Jerusalem, only 12,000 were left. In front of our own eyes, our parents, our brothers and sisters were taken away. Where are they, those hundreds of men abducted and taken to forced labor by the Lithuanians? Where are the naked women and the children who were taken out in that night of terror of the provocation? Where are the Jews of the Day of Atonement? And where are our brethren from the other ghetto? Those who were taken out through the gates of the ghetto shall never return. All the Gestapo's roads lead to Panar, and Panar means death. You, the people who are seized with despair, do not be deluded. Your children, your husbands, your wives are no longer. Panar is not a work camp. All of them were shot. Hitler plotted to destroy all Jews in Europe. It was the fate of Lithuanian Jews to be the first ones. Let us not be led like sheep to slaughter. True, we are weak and helpless, but the only response to the murderer is self-defense. Brethren, it is better to die fighting like free fighting men than live at the mercy of the murderers. To defend oneself to the last breath. Take care. Note, please, the date is the 1st of January, 1942, Vilna, in the ghetto. No, at that time, the organization had not yet been set up.
This is T289.
It was not so simple. It was not so simple to organize the fighting organization. Well, it is not too difficult to take up arms and shoot. Perhaps this is one of the simplest matters. I've been through several wars and several campaigns, and I can say it may be one of the easiest things. But how to explain that seemingly simple matter, that we all share the common fate, that not only those who had gone were gone, how to break that illusion that there is no escape, that death awaits all of us, and how to break that wall of despair, Your Honors. Here in the air, there hovers this question in the air of this courtroom: why did the people not rise? In Vilna too, until December 1941, more than 40,000 Jews had been taken away. And the question hangs in the air: why did they not rise? Well, I myself, as a fighting Jew, I revolt, I resent this question if it includes criticism, because those people who sit here in front of me,
he who sits facing me, and when they sang the song, when blood splurs from the sword, I do not owe him any answer. But, Your Honor, to fight under all conditions and under the conditions in the ghetto, one must organize first and foremost. And an organization of fighters must have an authority, a national authority, or an internal movement. Such an order was not given and could not have been given. From an internal movement, such an organization under conditions of terror, of disconnection and paralyzation, they were in uniform. We were in a glass cell. And who dare ask how a man does not revolt and rise up in a glass cell? Only people with a strong decision can do so, and people with a strong decision are not amongst the desperate and the broken. And they were desperate.
And they were broken, and they were desperate. I saw desperate people who had committed suicide, but I did not see people seized with despair become good fighters. This war too, which for some reason was called a war of despair, converted people into believers who had faith that there was sense in dying 1 hour earlier, to sacrifice oneself for something which had meaning. But out of this despair of people who had no longer any image of man left, it was taken away from them. It was not simple for them to absorb this message which we sent them. It was not a chance and a miracle. On the contrary, the miracle is that this minority existed which believed that proclamation and did what it did during those 2 years. The very existence of the fighting resistance organization, that is the amazing and incredible achievement. This was not the battle of an underground.
Mr. Cobb.
Schmidt.
Dupe the people there, and whatever was going on, there was always this planning to dupe and hoodwink people.
Thank you. Judge Landau, Mr. Hausner, we heard shocking matters here presented by a poet, but I wish to say that in many parts of this testimony we digressed quite far from the object of this trial. I think one cannot cut short such testimony because of the honor of the testimony and because of the matters about which he speaks. I think it is your duty, sir, to prepare the witness, to explain, to remove all external elements which do not pertain to this trial, in order not to place the court once again, and this is not the first time in this situation. I'm sorry to have to say this after this testimony.
When I will have the opportunity of winding up the prosecution, then the court will realize that these words are certainly not irrelevant.
Judge Landau, no, sir, it is not the first time that I've made this remark. The court has its own view about this trial according to the indictment, and we spoke about this explicitly, sometimes implicitly. but it was clear that the prosecution must adjust to what the court lays down.
We are always doing it, sir, beyond any shadow of doubt.
Judge Landau, I still do not see that this has really entered your consciousness sufficiently.
Because your honors do not know the whole of the documents which we've got to submit.
Judge Landau, we've heard your opening statement. I think it gives a general outline of what the prosecution will present.
All right,
we shall now stop this session, and the session will resume at 3:30 this afternoon. When did you enter the ghetto?
On the 15th of August, 41, we finished building the fence and the ghetto was sealed off.
Judge Landau, you yourself?
The Jews themselves built the fence and the bridge which connected the small ghetto with the large ghetto. On the 15th of August, the gates were locked. And before the gates were locked, I wish to add that this prohibition of entering the ghetto seemed to us as a rescue, because Jews wanted to be closed off into a certain fenced-off area to escape the daily beatings. But it seems that this fence did not save us, because a few days before the ghetto was sealed off, Jews went in convoys on foot and by carts, dragging their belongings into the ghetto, and on a certain Thursday known as the Black Thursday, over 1,000 people were taken and they just disappeared. This was a few days before the closing of the ghetto. A few days after the closing of the ghetto, when we hoped that we would be left alone within the fences, within the hedges, then already during the first days, the eldest of the community got an order to gather the intelligentsia, the Ältestenrat,
that was the Elders' Council.
To gather the intelligentsia of the people in order to sort the archives in the town. They asked that the people be young, intelligent, highly educated, well-dressed. And of course, it never occurred to us that this was only a trick. We collected the best in the ghetto, and some of them volunteered because they thought it would be an interesting job. There were some 530 men. They left the ghetto, left families behind, because most of them were young married people, and we waited for them to return. 1 day, 2 days, and then we learned they were taken behind Kovner, and all of them were shot down. This, of course, was the first blow after the ghetto was sealed.
This fence was no help.
Then we realized that the fence was no guard. And then this action, the action against the intelligentsia as this one was known, up with earth.
Dr. Peretz, you are a gynecologist. Were there any births in the ghetto during the Nazi occupation? Judge Landau, you may sit down, Dr. Peretz.
There were births, of course, because there were pregnant women who came into the ghetto in all stages of pregnancy.
What were the orders with regard to these women?
In July 42, there was an order that Jewish women are not allowed to be pregnant and to give birth. And I must say that the elders and the doctors did not take this order seriously enough, because whenever we got a new blow, it took us time to adapt ourselves to the new order. But after a time, when a woman came to me in advanced pregnancy and said that an SS man saw her in one of the small streets in an alley in the ghetto, and said that he would visit her 2 weeks later, and if she would still be pregnant, he would kill her, it became clear. And as a gynecologist, I got the order from the elder to stop every pregnancy that came to hospital. And then we made an arrangement and influenced the Germans that in the 8th or 9th month of pregnancy, the women would be allowed to give birth. But until this month, the pregnancy would be stopped. Of course, to stop a pregnancy in the 6th and 7th month is a very difficult and serious operation. Times were very difficult. We used to cross from the small ghetto into the large ghetto, and after the hospital was burned, then all the operations were done under very difficult conditions in kitchens, in small attics, in great difficulties, and there were victims, of course. But the älteste Jude, the head of the Jewish committee, was a famous doctor in Kovner for internal diseases. He understood the problems, and he told me that we may stop a pregnancy when there is danger to the life of the mother. But here there is a danger to the life of the mother in every case, therefore stop all pregnancies. And we used to stop pregnancies. But there were women who were real heroes. They did not agree to have the pregnancy stopped, and in such cases we used to encourage them. Although now I consider myself guilty, because I would encourage those women, and I would add words of encouragement, but all kinds of news from outside coming and speaking of victory for the Allies would encourage such women to go on with a pregnancy. I remember the case of a lawyer who came to me with his wife. For years they wanted a child and she was not pregnant. All of a sudden they came to us and he said, "My wife is pregnant. I do not want to stop this pregnancy." There is a conference in Casablanca. Maybe this conference, we always had hopes when there was a conference somewhere. Let us wait with the abortion until the end of this conference at Casablanca. Of course, I said yes, but Casablanca brought no salvation. And whenever there was some political step, women would come. May we wait with this pregnancy and perform their abortion later? There were others who endangered themselves, and there was no abortion, but their lot was bitter, and after the children were destroyed, the mothers died as well.
Those people, those women who were not permitted to give birth, would hide themselves among the pillows. They were not screaming, they were completely silent, they did not want to make any noise. And I was asked by the Elders' Council to attend a birth only when I am asked by a midwife or a nurse when there is any complication, and not to attend a normal birth, because thus I could have aroused suspicion on the part of the people in the area.
The elders of your community was respected by the community.
Our Elders' Council was popular. It was headed by a Jew, of high moral stature. We knew that he shares our suffering, and he protected our interests to the best extent with dignity. And the entire committee was popular. His name was Dr. Elkes. He was one of the most famous physicians in Lithuania. He died then in Dachau. Yes.
Tell us something about the children in the Kovner ghetto, Dr. Peretz, please.
I think that perhaps the biggest tragedy which the Jewish people had ever experienced was the tragedy of the children. The children in the ghetto would play and laugh, and their games, in these games, the entire tragedy was reflected. They would play grave digging. They would dig a pit and would put a child inside and call him Hitler. And they would play about gatekeeping of the ghetto. Part of the children were Germans, others were Jews, and the Germans were angry and would beat the other children who were the Jews. And they used to play funerals. All these games, the Jewish child was prematurely adult. We always were amazed how children 3 or 4 years old understood the entire tragedy of the tragic aspects of the situation, how they clammed up when it was necessary, how they knew how to hide. We ourselves did not believe that small children, when we wanted to give them a shot of sedatives, and the kid would say, "Doctor, this is not necessary, I shall be quiet, I shall not scream." We were always amazed at this adult attitude of these children. Of course, the horror, the climax of the horror in Kovno was the children's action, the children's operation. That came in March of 1944, the end of March. As I said, with every blow which we absorbed, we thought there could be nothing worse. And the parents in the ghetto were split into 2 camps. One part tried to find places to hide the children or take them out of the ghetto in all ways, inside the trunks or carts, covered up. Well, outside, take them outside. They would find some sort of arrangement with non-Jewish Lithuanians in villages, in the cities. They would pay money perhaps, or some other contacts which they had. And part of these children would then return to the ghetto after a while. And part of these parents who sent them underwent terrible experiences. The child disappeared, they did not know where he was, or he would reappear near the fence and the child would be returned. The people took the money but returned the child. But there were other parents who decided not to give away the children, to die with their children. I myself belong to that other category. I had heard so many brutalities and atrocious stories about the children hiding alone, without having any common language with the other people. In fear of death, I decided I would die with my child. But it then transpired, after this children's action, that it was impossible of execution, that there could arise a situation where the child goes and used to remain alive. And this was a situation which parents could not bear. And after this children's action, all of them were looking for some means, and only a very small fraction of the children remained children who hid in bunkers and shelters.
What was this action against children?
It was after a relatively tranquil period in the ghetto. We were not anticipating any outstanding events. All of a sudden, our Jewish police in the ghetto received orders to appear on the next day in the morning, polished and clean, at a certain spot, on the pretext of obtaining instructions about air raids. This police was taken. The ghetto population was not informed, but in the early hours of the morning, an automobile entered the ghetto and loudspeakers announced, "Anyone appearing outside will be killed." And this automobile with a loudspeaker circled the ghetto. Instinctively, perhaps, and maybe more because we had heard something similar had happened in a neighboring ghetto with children, mothers started screaming, "Children!" They must have felt that danger had come for the children. And then part of the mothers in the houses where they had cellars, where they had these malines, as we called them, the cellars. They went down with the children into these cellars, and automobiles entered the ghetto. They were playing music inside these automobiles. They had a phonograph, apparently to stifle the children's cries. And suddenly couples, a German and a Ukrainian, a German and a Ukrainian, dispersed, entered all courtyards of the ghetto and began tearing out children whom they encountered. They would put them into the trucks, into the automobiles. There were old people sometimes, grandmothers, grandfathers, and they transferred them into what was for us an unknown direction.
How many children were concerned?
That children's action took 2 days. On the first day, I was lying with the children in the cellar. I gave them shots, injections, and all these 17 children in the cellar. We survived the day in the cellar. When we came out, we had heard about children of friends who had gone. 1,000 children went on that day.
1,000 children.
On the next day, we thought the horror had passed, but suddenly people did not go to work. There was deep mourning in the ghetto. There was a child missing in almost every house. And on the next day, suddenly, people were standing outside. Something blew up, a detonation. And again, these units entered, and again everyone ran into his cellar. I then decided, I put my boy with my wife into the cellar. They had a kind of board which was over the entrance. Before the children entered, a mother would give me her child through this small window. I would give him an injection so he sleeps, and I would go home. I went home, I sat near the window on the second floor. I looked out to see what was happening in the street.
What did you see?
I saw shattering scenes. It was near the hospital. I saw automobiles which from time to time mothers would be approaching, mothers with children or only children. In back of them, 2 Germans with rifles would be going as if they were escorting criminals. They would toss them into the automobile. I saw mothers screaming. A mother whose 3 children had been taken away, she went up to this automobile and shouted at the child, at the German, "Give me the children." And he said, "How many?" And the German said, "You may have 1." And he went up into that automobile, and all 3 children looked at her and stretched out their hands. Of course, all of them wanted to go with the mother. And the mother didn't know which child to select, and she went down alone, and she left the car. And the second mother just hung on to the car and didn't want to let go, and the dog bit her. They set a dog against her. Another mother with 2 children, I saw that from my window, went and pleaded and begged that the German should return 1 child. So he took the girl by her shoulders and threw the girl down. Such scenes repeated themselves all day. Then I went downstairs and entered the hospital. There in the hospital, in addition to the patients, there were also sick children lying there. And then there came a group of 3 people, one Böhmischen. Dr. Böhmischen was one of them, as far as I recall. He was allegedly in charge of medicine, and he said that he heard that children were hiding under mattresses and under beds in the hospital. And if he said that he would be back in an hour, and if we do not turn over these children, the entire staff of the hospital would be sent with the children. Naturally, panic began in the hospital. We had barracks there where children of epidemic diseases, contagious diseases, Children with contagious diseases were lying there, and the Germans would not enter there. They were afraid of catching the disease. There were a few children hiding there in the hospital, and they were taken. We took them and put them into the barracks of the contagious diseases. They were put in the beds. There was a fever chart arranged for them, and the Germans did not enter. One German who stayed with us, apparently he had a lower rank. He told his superiors when they returned that he was through all rooms and hadn't found a single child. Then they took only two couples, an old physician who was there lying sick and another Jewish man, and they left the hospital. Judge Landau, what do you mean they took two couples? The witness, they took a couple of old people, an old physician who was there, a sick man, Dr. Kabaker, and his wife, and they took them into that truck. In the meantime, I again returned home, and out of the window I again watched what was going on. Naturally, my nerves could not hold out anymore, because I saw down below in our courtyard a German was entering and a Ukrainian. They had an axe, and I heard blows, and as if they were knocking down something, and I was thinking another moment and my wife and child will also appear in the street, as they were appearing out of each bunker, out of each cellar. But to my great fortune, they did not find the bunker, they did not find the cellar, and they left the courtyard. This went on an entire day, and at the end of this day, the sum total was 1,300 children. Naturally, children were left behind in the ghetto, but this was illegal, because there should have been no children left in the ghetto. And I remember my son, in the morning, he went and he was looking for a hiding place, and he consulted me. He would open a trunk, a box, close it. The boy was then 7.5 years old, 7 or 7.5. He would close the trunk and say, "Can you see me?" He would enter the cupboard, close it, would look as to the sides that a German was coming. This terror which seized the children, who knew very well what was happening to their little friends, their neighbors, and the difficulties of keeping the children in the ghetto became impossible. And then naturally the parents, who first thought they would die with the children, began looking for ways of taking them across the fence.
On certain occasions, you even succeeded.
Yes, we did succeed in certain cases, and a few score children were saved in this way. Judge Halevi.
All activities
With regard to the Jewish problem in the eastern occupied areas must be carried out in line with the assumption that the Jewish problem must find its solution, its general solution, in all areas of Europe.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hausner. This is marked 8-2. I see. Reichsführer SS. Who is he?
The other document, too, the question with the amendments to the Brown file, I no longer have the copy. I gave out the last one, which I had. Unless I'm mistaken, this was directed through the Ministry of the Interior.
Yes, Reichsführer SS and Chief of the Police within the Ministry of the Interior.
Which means this is under a different authority.
On the basis of what do you say? This?
Of course, the reference in sending these amendments is on this letter of the 10th of January. This is what they are referring to. The court will be so kind to check the reference to the same letter. It's the same reference. It fits perfectly.
Herr Präsident, kann mir das Aktenstück herübergegeben werden, der Posten hat Bedenken. Ich habe das Aktenstück selbst nicht hier durch einen Schreibfehler.
I should like to ask the court whether I could get the documents in question. The officer has some doubt. So far as I'm concerned, I haven't got the document. Can you give it to Dr. Savatsius? Unfortunately, I have no document left, answers the prosecutor.
Sir, I can present 1088. I have another copy.
Is this what you wanted to receive, Dr. Savatsius? Yes, this is the document I referred to. Now we're going to read it.
Would you do Savatsius?
Also, darf ich etwas bemerken? Es ist die Abteilung 2. Das ist ein Mann namens Billfinger, der ja auch unterschrieben hat im Auftrag. Also nicht die Abteilung Eichmanns, die das hier gefertigt hat.
This is, after all, the Department 2. Bilfinger signed it, and this was not Eichmann's department. How did SS Reichsführer here, how did Reichsführer SS entered into it? I don't know, says the judge. Mr. Hausner, in 1088, it is written, nach dem Ziffer 10, it is quoted in German, in Exhibit 348, there is no mention of it.
Yes, there is. At the bottom, before they speak about the general Jewish affairs, it has the figure 10.
Is this an entire document or part of it?
It's an integral document.
Thank you very much. What is solution 10 at the beginning? Oh, it's paragraph 10, I see. Where are the 9 paragraphs?
Well, sir, he is taking an attitude with regard to those paragraphs about which he has reservations and wants to differ from Rosenberg.
This makes the impression of a part of a document because he speaks here about a series of changes proposed by him. But as a matter of fact, there is only one change referred to.
Yes, he says that he will let Rosenberg know what changes he wishes to have made.
This, too, doesn't seem to be quite clear, because in the Brown file, paragraph 9, the matter is mentioned, not